So
Uh,
we're ready to turn it over to our presenters here on collaboration to address climate change in Chicago. There are actually four presenters who are going to be coming on the screen here in just a moment. Trent Ford is the Illinois State climatologist at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Elena Grossman, Community Benefits Program Manager at GTI Energy. Max Grover, Software Developer at Argonne National Lab. Peiwan Lee, Researcher at Discovery Partners Institute. And we're very excited to have all four of you joining us here this evening. So I think without further ado, we'll turn it over to you. I think starting with Trent.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for everybody for joining us on a Tuesday night here. I'm going to share my screen, just get confirmation here from the organizers that you can see them all. All right.
Yep, looks
All
good.
right. Minimize everything, maximize the things I want. All right. I'm going to kick us off and be the shortest speaker, I promise, because what I want to do is here open this presentation with just a very brief overview of what climate change looks like in Chicago. And then I'm going to turn it over to Max, P1, and Elena to dig into the details of not only what we're doing, so really focusing on solutions more than problems, but also the importance of collaboration, because this is such a large, wicked problem. So I'm breaking this down into a numerous number of problems. I'm going to be the problem bringer today. And the first one is the water problem, which is not really new to anybody who's lived in Chicago for more than about 5 minutes. The issue with climate change globally is an invigorated hydrological cycle. So more intense precipitation, but more evaporation as well, which kind of paradoxically leads to this issue of Chicago getting wetter, which we have. Chicago's about 5 inches wetter in any given year today than it was the turn of the 20th century, but dealing with extremes on both ends, dealing with really heavy precipitation that causes flooding in areas that are outside of map floodplains, but at the same time also dealing with high evaporation during the summertime that can lead to drought stress on trees that we're leaning on for, adaptive measures for heat and things like that. So really challenging when it comes to water problems and the both the kind of traditional gray infrastructure as well as the green and blue infrastructure to deal with those problems. And of course, with this being Water Week, there's all of these dozens of events that are going on to talk about all of the great innovation and work that's being done in water space in Chicago. Then we have the heat problem. We're getting warmer across Illinois and Chicago. Every season's warmed since the turn of the 20th century. And when we look at projections like what we see here in the top left, this is projections of the annual hottest 5-day maximum temperature across northern Illinois through the end of the century. And those green and red areas are showing different models under different scenarios projecting an increase in extreme heat, with that 5-day average high temperature projected to increase by anywhere between 4 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-century alone. So at least from an exposure standpoint, when we think about extreme heat, of course, Chicago has perhaps an infamous history with extreme heat and heat waves. What climate change is doing is increasing at least the frequency of extreme heat and putting a lot of onus on adaptation and mitigation measures and really building urban heat resilience, which is not just making sure that people have air conditioners, but is a more holistic way of planning for things like extreme heat. And I'm sure Elaine will probably talk about health implications and the role of healthcare management in that as well later on. Then we have the flora and fauna problems. These are issues that are too numerous. We could teach a whole seminar on just the plant and animal issues that are related to climate change. We have issues from our native species or our species of great cultural, economic, agricultural value across Illinois and Chicago. And these species are facing multifaceted threats. They're facing the same kind of threats from extreme weather that we as humans are, as well as emerging pests and diseases and competition from other types of plants and animals that may find a warmer and wetter Chicago a more suitable environment. Now, when we think about this, all of these things are connected, and this is really the kind of the wickedness of the climate change problem. One of the big kind of nature-based solutions that we talk about with dealing with and adapting to extreme heat is planting more trees across the city, and that's definitely being done. The city has taken upon themselves to plant a bunch of trees in some of the warmest areas and some of the areas that are least green across the city. The problem is that trees themselves are very sensitive to the extremes that come along with climate change, drought in particular. And so as we are building out these nature-based solutions, we have to make sure that we are doing so in a way that is going to make sure that those solutions themselves are resilient to the change in climate. And so, all of these things kind of interacting as one is just a really important, I guess, reminder that we really take a systems approach in understanding climate change's impacts and adaptation to that. Now, no presentation would be complete without a Venn diagram or five, and so this is mine to say that what we talk about all the time with climate change is this side of things, this hazards. So more extreme heat, more water. I mean, I've done it today, right? More severe weather. But what we really care about is the risk of some sort of impact, kind of the middle of the Venn diagram, which is not only a function of the hazard, but also the vulnerability of the underlying population, the underlying system, the economics, the built environment, the natural environment, the people. And that's of course influenced by more than just climate change. It's influenced by things like growth and planning, or the lack of planning, or bad planning, and justice. And so when we think about the term natural disaster, which nobody should say from now on, because only the hazards are natural, right? The fact that a heat wave occurs is something that's part of the climate system. But what turns that heat wave into a disaster is poor management, poor planning, and poor overall kind of environmental justice across a region. And so when we're making sure to understand that, yeah, climate change is a very large problem, but what it's doing more than anything is exacerbating the vulnerability that's already been built in some cases deliberately built into our system. And this isn't just across the city of Chicago, it's everywhere in Illinois. We can see that. And so a lot of the solutions to climate change in the vulnerability space are solutions to our justice in many ways. And I'm sure that some of the other speakers will talk about those kind of things as well. One example is urban flooding vulnerability. So this map here, every map is the same map of Chicago. This one shows the hot spots for flood damage. 311 calls for flood damage over the last few years. And we can see these are in areas, the predominantly the areas that flood are the areas that are some of the lowest average income, for example, majority minority communities. And so, where extreme rainfall falls, like for example, take the really heavy rainfall event in Cicero or the one in Calumet City last year, where that rain actually, the storm set up and where that rain falls is essentially random across the Chicagoland area. But where it floods is not. It has a lot to do with the developed system and how things were planned or not planned. And so when we think about the hazard is the heavy rain event, but what makes it a disaster is poor planning on the ground. And so making sure that we're investing in communities that have been historically divested to make sure we're righting these historical wrongs, and we're boosting up that resilience, so that even in a future Chicago in the next coming decades where we're seeing more heavy rainfall events, we have fewer and fewer flood impacts because of that. So I'm going to end with this slide here talking about building climate resilience. And I think a lot of the next three speakers, a lot of what they're going to talk about is different strategies for doing that. I mean, this is Venn diagram number 2. So my bad about that. But what you can see here is that it's we have the mitigation thing of solving the problem of climate change itself, reducing emissions, and then there's the adaptation, which is we have this increase in hazard frequency or intensity. So we need to adapt to that. And there's lots and lots of different ways. And really any community, any occupation, any career will touch one or more of these different ways of either mitigating or adapting to climate change. And so now we've gotten that very vague general description, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ping Wong to talk about to turn over to Max Grover to talk about Crocus and all the great work that they're doing to solve all these big problems that I've talked about here in Chicago. So Max, whenever you're ready, go ahead. I'm going to shut my camera off so you stop seeing me.
Thanks so much, Trent. So hello, everyone. I'm Max Grover. I'm a atmospheric data science software engineer at Argonne National Laboratory, and I'm just one member of the Crocus team. Here to talk about some of the observations that we're collecting and some of the awesome data coming out of Crocus. So what does Crocus stand for? It stands for if you can go to the next slide. It stands for the Community Research on Climate and Urban Science. So what does this mean? So it's really this large collaboration between not only Argonne, but many other universities, quite a few other universities, as well as a lot of community partners, where in terms of even coming up with the questions for the science project, we've gathered a lot of feedback, and a lot of the communities, specifically the Greater Chatham Initiative, Blacks and Green, as well as the Puerto Rican Agenda and the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, all different organizations around the city of Chicago and the broader Chicagoland region, really provide a lot of input here in terms of what science questions should we go after, which is really sort of different than the traditional MODEX approach, basically the model experiment approach you can see in the blue boxes on the right there, where we also incorporate education, workforce development, taking a look at the just energy transition, and like I said before, really incorporating a lot of that community feedback and really honing in on these questions that are important to these groups. So we start with those science goals, understanding the natural human drivers and effects of environmental change in an urban area. And our urban area of focus is the Chicagoland area. Developing that urban digital twin for climate services, and focusing on these advanced tools for decision making and some of the stakeholder capacity building, and really pushing for societal benefits, that sustainable, resilient, and equitable solutions for climate change, with special attention to some of these underserved communities, especially going to that map, referring back to the map that Trent had been showing, really empowering these communities with a lot of the basic science that they need to support what they're looking for. Go to the next slide. And yeah, so some motivation. So Crocus is all focused on Chicago, and as we know, Chicago is eighth in income inequality among the nation's largest cities, and we know that a lot of the built infrastructure sort of reflects some of these historical decisions, and you can see some of the key partners that we're working with, including Blacks and Green down in Woodlawn, the Greater Chatham Initiative down in Chatham, and then also Humboldt Park through the Puerto Rican Agenda, and then kind of the broader Chicagoland region being the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. Let's go to the next slide, please. So one of the key components of Crocus is actually setting up a micronet, or essentially a lot more sensors that allow us the ability to measure a lot of those big risks like Trent was talking about. So mainly extreme heat, extreme precipitation leading to flooding and so on, and then also air quality, which we also know has a huge impact on people, and especially in cities. So our sensors, which you can see in the middle there, include both the scientific instrumentation to be able to measure these key variables like temperature, air quality, precipitation, and moisture. But then they also include within there an actual CPU and GPU, a computer that can be run right there at the edge, right next to where it's collecting data, and goes to our data warehouse and store. And I'll do a little bit of a live coding demonstration. All the data is open, available to the public for people to use. It'd be great to see more people using this data, and really it's vital for adaptability and being able to use by the community. Next slide, please. So how do you access some of this data we're collecting for the project? Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So at this point, I'm actually gonna share my screen, Trent, if that's okay. Share. And I will go ahead and copy and paste this into the chat. So if people want to follow along, they can. So this is an example of the observations that we're collecting for Crocus. You'll see our 3 main sites that we've deployed right now. Within the next year or so, we'll have another 19 of these stations deployed around the city and around the Chicagoland area, mainly being Northeastern Illinois University up there on the northwest side, Chicago State University down near Chatham, and Northwestern University up in Evanston. So if we click on one of these nodes, let's say, for example, Northeastern Illinois, you could see a little graphic there of the sensor. In there is where the computer is at, and you can see all the different sensors that it has, along with a bunch of information about the sensor itself. If we go to the data browser, we can actually look at a website where we can compare all these different nodes. This is looking at temperature over time. This green plot down here, this represents Northwestern University node. If we go up here, this is the Northeastern Illinois University, and then up above that is from Chicago State University. So you could see even just along the lake, this is from today, you could see with the Northwestern University site being closer to the lake, just some of those differences being farther close to the lake. You also notice on the left, so if you wanted to download what's shown in this plot here, you could just copy and paste that to your terminal. And you can also, it has a Python snippet. So if anyone's interested in hacking on this, you could go ahead and copy that and paste that to your notebook of choice. And that would go ahead and load the data in. It's using starting from the last 30 minutes. So load that into your notebook. Once it accesses that, and give you the most recent data from there. Give it a second. While that's going, we have a suite of examples that you can go through and dig in. This is that WXT sensor. This is measuring temperature and humidity and wind. So we also have a whole suite of cookbooks meant for helping people get started with the data, kind of sort of covering what some of the jargon here in terms of the API, investigating some of the data sets. You can see breaking down one of those case studies, looking at the wind over time, looking at a diurnal cycle where we see the temperature going down throughout the day, and showing how to save that out to a CSV file. And if we go back to the notebook here, load that in, and that's your pandas data frame with all your different variables. So I'll go ahead and link this within the chat as well, if people want to go ahead and check that out. If you click at the top of the page, you can see you can download it as an IPython notebook, which will just throw it within your downloads, and you can see it downloaded it there. So I encourage folks, the main dependency that you need is the Sage data client, which you can install just using pip or conda or whatever your installation of choice is. So that Sage data client is what will allow you to interact with our edge computing interface. Trent, if you want to go back to the slides. So it was a quick demonstration of how to pull some data from the different nodes. That was all within the Python programming language, which again I encourage folks to check out if you're interested. And be on the lookout. We'll have additional nodes going up over time. If you want to go ahead and click through next couple slides. Go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah, so if you go back one more, if you pull out your phone as well, that'll take you to those instrument cookbooks like I was showing. So yeah, I encourage people. Crocus is collecting a lot of really interesting data. We'll have some intensive operation periods, basically times when we bring a bunch more sensors into the city. This summer we'll be focused on an urban canyon, and the next summer we'll be focused a little bit more on precipitation. We'll bring in some more instruments to look at extreme rainfall and some of those summer rain events. So yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and close out. Yeah, thanks to everyone who's been a part of Crocus. It's been really exciting to see this micronet go up and a lot of these critical observations that are giving us more information about that extreme heat, air quality, as well as extreme precipitation. I'll go ahead and pass it off to the next person. And you can see a list of all of our sponsors, or all of our organizations that are involved.
All right, thank you, Max and Trent, for the very comprehensive introduction and also Thanks for all the effort doing in Crocus project, because I am also a part of the Crocus on the modeling team. So I will basically talk about the modeling effort we did using the Crocus data. So my name is Peiyuan Li. I'm a researcher at Discovery Partners Institute. DPI is also part of the Chicago Water Week event. We will have an event tomorrow morning, so please stay tuned for that event. So let's get started. So basically, the focus of our modeling work is basically on the urban area. So urban area is very different from those nature lines. So if you talk about nature lines, you always have very wide coverage, very minor human footprint. They are relatively homogeneous and usually unmanaged. But if you see the urban landscape, go to the next frame, please. So it has a lot of people in it. It has different, complex ecosystem processes and also anthropogenic processes in it. So it causes a lot of challenging when you really want to to simulate all these detailed processes in a very complex environment. Next, please. And yeah, okay. So actually, there are a lot of environmental issues in the built environment. Urban heat island effect, the carbon emissions, pollution, flood, traffic, inequality, loss of biodiversity because of anthropogenic activities, and also waste management. So this really affects the people, everyday life. From even for the big companies in the cities, they now need to consider the climate financial disclosure due to the climate change or the intensive. All this gonna intensify the environmental issues happening in the built environment. Next, please. So why like we need to care about the urban environment is because it has a lot of, since all the people living in cities nowadays, even you live in urban areas, also have a connection to the city urban environment. And the climate change is doing something really bad to the cities. For example, the capital city of Indonesia is going to migrate its capital city to new places because of the flooding condition, because of the traffic congestion and air pollution in Jakarta. Next, please. And apparently it's costing a lot. So we want the solutions for the urban environmental issues. Next, please. Yeah, so when we survey all the landscapes, we're talking about large-scale climate change, and we also talk about very detailed measurements in the urban environment. For example, the measurements conducted in Crocus. So in this diagram, I show the scale spectrum from the largest scale Earth climate modeling to the smallest scale of the urban environmental modeling. Next, please. And next, please. So what we are doing here is actually, since we now can collect the data from the urban environment to a great detail, right? So in this case, we use the the data from the satellite image and also the high precision LiDAR scan of the cityscape combined with the three-level observation network conducted by the Crocus effort. So we can combine these two to develop some models, regardless of its process-based model or the machine learning model, to give you a very detailed description of how the three-level environment is gonna look like when some weather event happens. Next, please. So here, the figure here shows you how precise the LiDAR data can be when you scan the cityscape. As you can see, it can resolve the every detail of the trees, the buildings, and even the light poles on the street. Next. And from this data set, we can actually convert it, to some high resolution description of the cityscape. The figure here shows you the green color shows you the height of the trees, meaning you have the measurement for the green spaces in the urban area, and the red actually is the height of the buildings. So combining these two, now we are resolving the dynamics between the trees and the buildings, so that we can calculate what a heat release from the building, what is a heat reduction or the mitigation from the urban trees. Next. So here's basically a diagram showing that how we leverage those data sets. So yeah, it's basically we heavily rely on the measurement from the in situ weather stations from Crocus and from the other research institutes. Next. And we probably skip this one. Go to next slide. So here, actually, this is our final product that shows the temperature variation across the Chicago neighborhoods. As you can see, the blue area shows you the low temperature, and the red area shows the high temperature. So even within this very small neighborhood, there will be like 2 degrees Celsius, roughly 4 degrees Fahrenheit temperature difference during a day. So it is quite large. So in showing this map, we are talking about like the temperature justice, right? So if you have some areas it's very hot, apparently we need some mitigation strategies deployed at that location, or even the future observation efforts need to be taken place in that region. Next. And next. So actually, we did this whole map for the Chicago region, since it's coupled with the weather forecast model, so it will give you the hourly temperature prediction over the entire city of Chicago. So basically, we are trying to provide you a city-wide coverage plus the 3-level details of the temperature variation, since it's based on the observational station. So it has a very high resolution, and it can be you can access a product under all weather conditions. So our effort here really want to help the applications on walkability and drivability within the urban environment, and also to develop the location-aware strategic mitigation actions to certain area. And we hope this product can also help the heat-related environmental health studies. So actually, this product is already online. So if you want to download or have a look at it, you're welcome to do so. And yeah, that's all my content.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Elena Grossman. I am a community benefits program manager at GTI Energy, but I'm pretty new. And prior to that, I spent 12 years working at UIC in the School of Public Health on climate change, health, and health equity. And I do teach a course for Yale's Climate and Health Certificate Program on human health and climate adaptation. So I am going to be very practical here, and I'm going to share with you some examples of what's going on in Illinois at the state, Chicagoland regional area, and then the city, addressing climate change that has impacts on health. Something that I like to say, especially about public health, is that not all of the strategies that impact public health are public health superpower, as I like to say. So if you think of urban planners or architecture or engineers, they do a lot of work. They have expertise in areas that have huge impacts on public health. And so partnerships are really essential in this. Next slide, please. But I first want to start with Grover and really talk about how things that feel far away to us are really hard for us to grasp and understand, right? Even if you think of when you go for a job interview and they're like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And we really hate that question because it's really hard to imagine where we will be. Next slide, please. Let alone in 2100. I'm not going to go into detail about this, but it's from the National Climate Assessment, and it's looking at projected change in heavy precipitation events in 2100. We have a really hard time connecting with that as humans. Next slide, please. But what we do connect with are events, right? So these are just a couple of images from flooding events around the state of Illinois. We can see it, we can sympathize, we might be able to empathize, and it really grabs our attention and we can understand. Next slide, please. And there's data to support this. So Yale has a program on climate change communication. They ask a whole slew of questions. I pulled out these two. The majority of adults in the United States believe climate change is happening, but less than half think it's harming them personally. And when we don't think something is harming us personally, then we're not as inclined to do something about it. Next slide, please. So I am going to talk about the here and the now, what we are doing, and how we want to shift that conversation away from what's happening in the future and how it's happening now. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about something at the state level, Chicagoland regional level, and city of Chicago level. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I was at the UIC School of Public Health for a while, and for many of those years, I was the program director for building resilience against climate effects. It was a CDC-funded program where we worked with the Illinois Department of Public Health to help prepare the state for the health effects from climate change. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the bullets on the left, just for time, but the last one, which I want to focus on, is promoting climate change in public health planning. So we worked with local health departments and we facilitated strategic planning sessions. So what we did is on the right. So we first started with really just a lecture on climate change, health, and equity. Then we did more of an interactive session where we talked about, what are the health effects of most concern in your community? And then identifying strategies to address those health effects and then creating a work plan. Next slide, please. Whoops, next slide, please. There we go. So these are some examples of the products from these local health departments. I'm just going to highlight the one on the left, which is a post from the Kendall County Health Department. And in late February one year, it was really warm. And when it's really warm, so Kendall County is about 50 miles south of Chicago, so still pretty far north. And when it's really warm in northern Illinois, we go outside. And after the work that we had been doing with Kendall County, they thought, you know what, we should probably do a tick drag because so many people are outside. We have so many forest preserves. They're probably in shorts and tank tops, and they're probably not thinking about ticks as a problem. And they collected 30 deer ticks and they collected 30 deer ticks that were known carriers of Lyme disease, and they notified the public, and there was lots of surprise. It's so early because the season is changing. And so this was just an example of the type of work that we did. And a lot of it was really about increasing knowledge and awareness about the health effects from climate change. Next slide, please. Something else that I worked on at UIC was I created the Climate and Health Institute. And it was really about increasing knowledge and awareness among future public health professionals about climate change, public health, and equity, and what you can do about it. And so the first year was really focused on that, and they went through a number of trainings. In the second year, they actually partnered with community partners to work on a project. And during year one, those partners actually provided training so that it was very practical for them. Next slide, please. And this is just to show you who we worked with. All 4 of these municipalities are considered environmental justice communities. And we also partnered with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. Some of their work it probably just ended because I left, unfortunately, but a lot of it was about providing resources for municipal leadership on heat and how they can incorporate into the work that they're currently doing so it doesn't feel so burdensome. And also a lot of increasing knowledge and awareness about flooding, about water resources to the community members as well as municipal leadership. Next slide, please. Actually, I'm going to skip over. This is basically, you can go through there's another one. Yeah. So the metropolitan, yeah, that's okay. I'm going to skip over that one. You can go to the next slide just for sake of time. So now I'm going to focus on the city of Chicago. And there's really this one project that's going on that that's current, and that's Our Roots. And it's a really awesome project. It's based on a tree equity map that the University of Chicago created. And it identified communities that had the lowest tree canopy coverage. And they're investing in these communities. And a really cool aspect of it is the Tree Ambassador Program, where they are training and paying community members within these underserved communities to be knowledgeable about trees, to talk about trees with their neighbors, also understand some of the misconceptions about trees, and to encourage their neighbors to dial 311 to have trees planted in their neighborhood. And again, this is something that isn't necessarily a public health superpower, right? Most likely people in public health are not working in the departments that are planting trees, but they have huge impacts on our health, right? It provides shade, it can reduce flooding impacts, and it has really great social benefits, which I'll also talk about. Next slide. This is just to show you some of their results from 2022, and you can see where they planted the trees, and you can see that their target communities, how much they've planted in their target communities, and it's still ongoing. It's a really awesome project. Next slide, please. So this is the other project that I wanted to share, especially for equity purposes. So the 606 is a Rails to Trails program. There are a handful, there are many actually throughout the country. It's really awesome. They converted abandoned train tracks into a trail, and it's great. It provides a resource for people to get outside, to exercise. There's more green space. There's lots of benefits, right? There's protections from heat, or there can be because of the green space and flooding. But what's really important to think about, especially these built environment strategies, is gentrification, because when there are more trees, more parks, better access to bike lanes, to walkability, to public transportation, people with more money are then looking to buy. And there were advocates that were basically saying this is going to happen, especially in the lower income neighborhoods that this trail goes through, but nothing was done about it. And home prices in these areas went up 344%, and a lot of people were pushed out because their property taxes went up. I'm not a gentrification expert. I know that there are strategies that can be done. So it's a really important piece when thinking about built environment strategies to address equity concerns. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to end on how the built environment has so many benefits that address climate change, public health, as well as our mental health. And there was a natural experiment that happened with the old Robert Taylor homes that are now down, but there were a number of buildings, and there were property managers, and all the buildings had green space, but it was really up to the property managers to maintain it. Some of them said, no, I can't, it's too much work. And so they got rid of it. Some of them didn't. So now you have this natural experiment of some people with access to green space and some people who did not. And researchers from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign found that people in buildings with greenery were more likely to know their neighbors, speak to their neighbors, know neighbors on first name basis, and rely on their neighbors for a favor. And so it really just shows how there's so many positive impacts from strategies, particularly built environment strategies that address climate change, public health, social connectedness, mental health, and other aspects of public health that aren't necessarily connected to climate change, like diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular illnesses. And that's it.
All right.
Great.
Thank you all. That was great. I was like, wow, there's four of them. Are we going to get through it in time? You did it. Thank you. Appreciate that. We do have time for a few questions, and we believe me, there are quite a few from the audience, so we will not get to all of them. But I think one of them, Cameron, if you don't mind, if I'll kind of like hijack your question because I want to kind of broaden it a bit, and I had it too. But Cameron had kind of asked during Max, your part of the presentation, does Crocus have any relation to the city's 2022 climate action plan? And I want to kind of broaden that just to sort of maybe ask the group, do your projects have connection to the city's climate action plan? Obviously, and even at the state level, there's the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, right? There are all these policies and frameworks that are in place. How do you relate to those political kind of or like administrative initiatives? As scientists, do you try to like keep an arm's length, or because it sounds like, especially you, Elena, you're starting to like really, your work overlaps a lot. So I'm just kind of curious how you all relate to those kinds of policies.
Yeah, I can sort of take it from the at least from the Argonne and from the Crocus perspective. We're very focused on answering a lot of those science questions that were mentioned, and really working with a lot of those community-based organizations on answering the scientific questions and gathering the data that they're interested in. Not necessarily advocating for anything in particular, but really answering kind of some of the science that needs to be answered there, and sort of relying on the community organizations to kind of take the data, to take a lot of the findings and stuff like that we have to go down and do their work. But yeah, I can kind of open up to other folks here.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Our Roots is actually connected to, or when Our Roots was created, they connected it to the city's climate action plan. And I think that often happens with some of these programs and projects where there's a nice fit in one of the climate action, in whether it's CJA or a climate action plan at the city, municipal, like big Chicago or any other municipal level. If there's a project that they can fit into that action plan, then they will. And so I'm pretty sure that often happens.
Yeah, real quick at the state level, we have climate change and climate science integrated into several kind of guiding documents, sort of like what Max says. It's not really saying this is the policy that needs to be put in place, but guiding documents like the state's water plan that was completed last year. The state updated its hazard mitigation plan last year that's in the works for FEMA, and there's one that I'm missing too, but the energy security plan. And so those are the kind of documents too that where climate change is sort of a through line through them, and really guides in some cases, decades, of work that the state is doing.
Well, DPI's role is maybe a little bit different because we also have a lot of connections with the industry companies. So in this case, we are actually pushing them to investigate on the make urban area greener. So this effort gonna be synergistic to the municipal's efforts to put in more trees in Chicagoland.
Great, thank you. You want to do the next one, Michael?
Yeah, sure. Actually, if you don't mind, I think I'm going to do something similar to what you did, Derek, and hijack one of Cameron's questions. It is kind of a similar question I had, and I think can kind of do something similar and kind of maybe be a question for all of you, and how all of your work kind of relates to one another. I think Cameron was asking this more in particular with your work, Peiwan, about asking how does the temperature look with reference to public health data. But but like I said, I kind of would like to open that up to others and kind of ask, how you see the work you're doing and the data, you're collecting or using, kind of speaking to one another's projects. So yeah, there's that question for you, Peiwan. I know Max, you had kind of mentioned just kind of making the data available that other folks and other projects could use. Have you seen any kind of community members or projects kind of use the Crocus data set to do some of this kind of public health mapping or anything interesting like that? And I guess similar with Elena, like kind of work that you are doing or have done with the public health, how much are you relying on some of these kind of sensor-based data sets or other kind of data sets to drive some of that public health programming?
Yeah, one side project we're doing is also like to link those temperature measurement to the how people in the cities perceive the heat. So this can be different because sometimes the model gives a temperature, but people feel heat from very different like variables. For example, the temperature, humidity, radiation, wind. Sometimes you feel even cooler in downtown because there's a lot of shade caused by the tall buildings. So in this case, it's gonna be complicated to directly link, say, temperature to the health outcomes. There will be a lot of internal or external factors affecting the relationship between one or each other. So from our like preliminary investigation on this relation, we cannot try to establish the causal relation between temperature and the health outcome, especially the heat-related health outcome. So yeah, we are since the temperature is just at the very initial stage of our modeling work. We're still working on, say, the humidity, the wind speed, and the radiation. So in this case, when we roll out, have a complete view of how the perceived heat can be represented by the model, it's definitely a good try to connect it with the health data.
So I would say that there's a lot of work that's looking at health data and weather data or climate data, especially like waterborne disease outbreaks after extreme precipitation events is a big one. Obviously heat related, but also cardiovascular, both hospitalizations and deaths after extreme heat, as well as poor air quality days, asthma hospitalization. So really trying to look at, and then looking at trends over time. Are we seeing it getting worse? And to that can then inform priorities and planning and what to do about it. So a lot of public health professionals are looking at that type of data, and also including social justice data in there as well, to have an even stronger understanding as to, you might have a hot area, but maybe they're not as susceptible, or that type of information to understand where you can prioritize.
Yeah, something we have talked about as well. So like I was showing those sensors and the computer and the sensors sort of integrated in one. We're working through some of our data ambassadors at the University of Chicago, being able to actually send out where people could subscribe to like an application or like a text alert or something like that could use the data on the node to give them a notification if air quality values are above a certain threshold, or if heat index values are above a certain threshold and stuff like that. So that's very much still in development, but taking a look at how we can make some of the data actionable and useful to some of these local communities we've had, especially the Chatham community has expressed explicit interest in something like that.
Great, thank you.
Well, we are
I
a
think,
few
Derek,
minutes
that might be
over.
time.
Yeah, it's time. So thank you again to Peiwan, to Max, to Elena, to Trent, for sharing your time with us and your expertise. It's great. We have top minds working on these issues. So thank you again. For everybody tuned in, we are going to transition to the civic hacking portion of the evening. You can probably go join now. I think Katie is our host over there tonight. You can go to this link, bit.ly/CHN remote Zoom, and it will take you to a Zoom call where we will do the civic hacking portion and breakouts. So I think with that, we'll end with our catchphrase, which is go forth and hack. If everybody wants to say it with us. 1, 2, 3, go forth.
Go